Why would a Viking king burn his own son alive just for practicing magic? The answer lies in a secret so shameful, Viking warriors would rather die than be accused of knowing it. You probably picture Vikings as these fearless berserkers who worshipped Odin, the All-Father. And you know Odin was the master of magic, right? He sacrificed his eye for wisdom. He hung from a tree for runes. Magic was literally the power of the gods. But here is the massive contradiction that historians often gloss over. If a human man tried to do exactly what Odin did, if a Viking warrior tried to practice this specific type of forbidden sorcery, he wasn't hailed as a hero. He was hunted down, he was labeled a pervert, and in many cases, he was executed by his own family. This isn't just a story about spells and potions. This is an investigation into the fragile masculinity of the Viking Age. We are going to uncover a taboo so deep that just whispering a single word, Ergi, could get you legally killed on the spot. To understand why this magic was banned for men, we have to look at a crime scene from the 10th century. Imagine you are in Norway. The king is Harald Fairhair, the guy who united the whole country. He's the ultimate alpha male of the Viking world. He has many sons. One of them is named Ragnvald. Ragnvald isn't like his brothers. He doesn't just want to raid and swing axes. Ragnvald is an expert in magic. He keeps company with sorcerers. He learns the old ways. Now, you'd think having a wizard for a son would be an asset, right? A secret weapon? Wrong. When King Harald hears about Ragnvald's hobbies, he doesn't send him a congratulatory card. He sends his other son, Eirik Bloodaxe. Yeah, that's his name, tells you everything you need to know. He sends Eirik to Ragnvald's hall. Eirik barricades the doors, and he burns the entire hall to the ground, with Ragnvald and 80 of his sorcerer companions inside. 80 men, screaming, burning. And the rest of the kingdom? They cheered. They thought it was good work. So, here is the mystery we need to solve today. Why? Why was Ragnvald's magic so offensive that his own father had to incinerate him to save face? What were they actually doing in that hall? To figure this out, we have to look at the weapon they were using. You see, Hollywood gets Viking magic wrong every single time. In movies, it's lightning bolts and fireballs. It's basically superhero stuff. But real Norse magic, the stuff Ragnvald died for, was called Seidr. Seidr wasn't about blasting people. It was about spinning. Literally, spinning thread. In the Viking Age, men ploughed fields and fought wars. Women ran the household and produced textiles. Spinning wool into yarn was the quintessential female task. And Seidr was viewed as spinning fate. Just like the Norns, those three mysterious ladies at the base of the world tree who weave the destiny of every human, a practitioner of Seidr would enter a trance and weave outcomes. They could see the future. They could bless a newborn. But if they wanted to get nasty, they could untie the knot of your luck. They could make you freeze in battle so you couldn't lift your sword. They could literally spin your mind into madness. Sounds powerful, right? If I were a Viking warlord, I'd want a battalion of these guys. I'd want a sniper unit of Seidr men cursing the enemy army before we even landed the ships. But I wouldn't do that, because using Seidr required a man to act, like a woman. This is clue number 1 in our investigation, the tools of the trade. Archaeologists have opened graves of wealthy women, like the famous Oseberg ship burial, and found these metal wands. For years, people thought they were roasting spits for meat, or measuring sticks. But they weren't. They were distaffs, the rod you hold wool on when you spin. The magic wand of the Viking Age was a symbol of female domestic labor. Imagine a Navy SEAL today, big, burly guy. Now imagine that to operate his sniper rifle, he has to put on a dress and sit in a knitting circle. That is the level of cultural dissonance we are talking about here. But it goes deeper than just holding a stick. It's about what happens in your head. To perform Seidr, you had to let spirits in. You had to go into a trance. You had to lose control. You became a vessel. You were receiving the spirits. And in the hyper-macho world of the Vikings, a man never receives. A man takes. A man penetrates. A man conquers. For a man to voluntarily put himself in a submissive, receptive spiritual position, to let another entity ride his mind, that was seen as sexually deviant. This leads us to the word I mentioned earlier, the word that could get you killed. Ergi. If you called a Viking man Ergi or Arga, you were accusing him of being unmanly. But it's specific. It means the passive partner in a same-sex relationship. It implies cowardice, softness, and perversion. Practicing Seidr made you Ergi by default. So, Ragnvald Rettilbein wasn't just burned because he was a wizard. He was burned because he was an embarrassment. In the eyes of his father, the king, Ragnvald had debased himself. He had become a woman in a man's body. And in a society that valued martial strength above everything else, that was a contagion that had to be purged with fire. But wait a minute. If you know your mythology, you're screaming at the screen right now. But Odin does Seidr. Odin is the master of it. You are absolutely right. And this brings us to the most fascinating piece of evidence in our case file, the hypocrisy of the gods. Odin is the All-Father. He's the god of war, poetry, and death. But he is also the god who learned Seidr. And guess who taught him? Freya, the goddess of love and war. She brought this magic from her tribe, the Vanir, and taught it to the Aesir. But even among the gods, Odin gets made fun of for this. There's this poem called the Lokasenna. It's basically a roast battle. Loki, the trickster god, bursts into a feast and starts insulting everyone. And when he gets to Odin, he doesn't make fun of his missing eye. He doesn't make fun of his age. Loki says, "But you, Odin, you practiced Seidr on Samsi. You beat on a drum like a sorceress. You went in the guise of a wizard through the world of men, and I thought that showed a mighty lack of manliness." Loki calls the king of the gods, Ergi, to his face. And Odin, he doesn't deny it. He just hits back by saying, "Well, you lived underground as a woman for 8 years and milked cows and gave birth to babies, so you're worse." That's the defense. I might be a wizard, but you're a mom. Here is the crucial difference. Odin is a god. He transcends human rules. He is above gender. He can do whatever he wants to get power. If he needs to turn into a woman to get knowledge, he does it. If he needs to hang himself, he does it. He breaks taboos because he makes the rules. But you? A human farmer named Sven. You don't get that pass. If you act like Odin, you get the Ragnvald treatment. So, what did this forbidden magic actually look like? If you were a man brave enough, or desperate enough, to break the law, what were you actually doing? We have a chilling description from the saga of Eric the Red. It describes a Seidr ritual in Greenland. Now, the practitioner here is a woman, a little prophetess, but it gives us the blueprint of the horror. She arrives at the farm wearing a blue cloak set with stones down to the hem. She has a necklace of glass beads. She holds a staff with a brass knob studded with stones. She wears catskin gloves, white and furry inside, and on her feet, calfskin shoes with long laces and tin buttons. She is treated like royalty. She is given a special high seat with a cushion made of hen feathers. And then comes the meal. To power her magic, she is fed a porridge made from the hearts of every kind of animal on the farm. Hearts. When the ritual starts, the women of the household form a circle around her high seat. They start a weird, high-pitched chanting called Galda. It's meant to attract the spirits. The prophetess sits in the center, spinning her staff, drifting into a trance, her soul leaving her body to travel the 9 realms and find answers. Now, imagine a man in that high seat, wearing the blue cloak, holding the staff, surrounded by chanting women. To a Viking observer, this was a complete inversion of the natural order. A man shouldn't be sitting on a cushion of feathers, eating hearts while women sing to him. He should be out in the cold, killing the wolf to get the heart in the first place. But here is where the mystery gets darker, because despite the ban, despite the burning of Ragnvald, men did practice it. We call them Seidrmen, and they were the boogeymen of the Viking world. If a Seidrman came to your village, you didn't invite him in for beer. You locked your doors. They were often drifters, outcasts, men who had no clan and no honor. They were hired guns, but for spiritual warfare. Let's say you have a neighbor you hate. He stole your land. You can challenge him to a duel, a holmgang. That's the manly way. Or you could pay a Seidrman. The Seidrman wouldn't fight your neighbor. He would go up to a rocky outcrop overlooking your neighbor's farm. He would take a horse's head and put it on a pole. This is called a nidstang, a Nithing pole. He would carve runes into the wood. He would turn the horse head to face the farm, and he would chant a curse. He wouldn't just ask Thor to strike the guy with lightning. The curse was specific. He would ask the land spirits, the landvættir, to be disgusted by the neighbor, to flee the land so nothing would grow. He would attack the neighbor's mind, sending nightmares, panic attacks, and bad luck. This was considered incredibly dirty fighting. It was like using biological warfare in a boxing match. There is a famous story about the hero Egil Skallagrimsson. Egil was a warrior poet, a tough guy, but he knew magic. When the king of Norway exiled him, Egil didn't just leave. He set up a Nithing pole. He stuck a horse head on a hazel pole, faced it toward the land, and cursed the king and queen. He said, "I forbid the guardian spirits of the land to find their way home until they have driven King Eric and Queen Gunhild out of the country." And you know what? It worked. They were expelled shortly after. But Egil was an exception. He was a hero who used magic on the side. For most men, being known as a sorcerer was a death sentence. This brings us to a terrifying realization. The Vikings didn't ban men from using magic because they thought it was fake. They banned it because they knew it was real, and they were terrified of what it did to the man using it. They believed the soul wasn't just one thing. They thought you had parts. The hammer was your shape or skin. The hugger was your mind or thought. The fylgja was your fetch, your spirit follower. When a man practiced Seidr, he was manipulating his hammer. He was changing his shape. There are stories of men who would go into a trance and their bodies would lie there like they were asleep or dead. But miles away, a massive bear or a wolf would appear and attack their enemies. This is the origin of the berserker legend, partially. But berserkers were accepted. They were channeling rage. That's manly. A Seidrman was channeling spirit. He was leaving his body behind. The Vikings believed that if you left your body too often, or if you let too many spirits ride you, you came back wrong. You came back less human. You came back Ergi. It's almost like a spiritual radiation sickness. The more you used the magic, the more your masculinity decayed. And in a society that lived and died by the shield wall, where every man had to be able to hold the line next to his brother, you couldn't trust a man whose soul was loose. You couldn't trust a man who fought with whispers instead of iron. Now, I want to take a detour to something that might surprise you. We've been talking about how much Vikings hated men doing female magic. But this strict gender divide? It might reveal something huge about their military success. Think about it. In many ancient cultures, the priests and the warriors were separate castes. But in Viking society, the priest role was often taken by the jarl or the king. They did the sacrifices. But the visionary role, the shaman role, was outsourced to women. By forcing men to reject Seidr, the Vikings created a hyper-specialized class of warriors who were psychologically inoculated against magical thinking. If you are a Viking warrior, you are taught that your fate is already woven by the norms. You can't change it. You can't spin it. All you can do is meet it with a smile. This fatalism made them terrifying. If you believe you can do a ritual to save your life, you might hesitate in battle. You might try to bargain with the gods. But if you believe magic is women's work and your death date was set the day you were born, you just charge. The ban on Seidr for men was a psychological tool to create fearless soldiers. But there were loopholes. We found a grave in Sweden. It's called the grave of the magician of Birka. For a long time, archaeologists looked at the contents, weapons, shield, horse, and said, "Ah, a great warrior." Then they looked closer. They found a pouch. Inside were the jawbone of a beaver, the penis bone of a raccoon, casting lots, and a wand, a metal staff. This was a warrior, but he was also a sorcerer. Was he a hypocrite? Was he a Seidman living in secret? Or, and here is the controversial theory, were there certain types of magic that were allowed for men if they were disguised as something else? We need to talk about Galdr. I mentioned it briefly before. Galdr is chanting. It's singing runes. It's low, throat-singing, rhythmic sounds. Unlike Seidr, which was about spinning and trance, Galdr was about projection. You are shouting your will onto the world. Odin is the master of Galdr too. It seems that Viking society made a very subtle distinction. If you sang magic to blunt an enemy sword, that's okay, that's aggressive, that's active. If you spun magic to change the future, that's passive, that's banned. It's a double standard that hinges entirely on the active versus passive dynamic. It's the difference between punching someone and poisoning their drink. But what happened if you got caught? Let's go back to our flash forward. Let's look at the fate of those who didn't get the protection of being a king's son like Ragnvald. If you were a common man accused of Seidr, you were often outlawed. Being an outlaw in the Viking Age was a fate worse than death. It didn't just mean you had to leave town. It meant you lost your manhelg, your human rights. You were called a forest walker. Anyone could kill you. No one would be punished for it. In fact, killing you was a public service. You couldn't inherit property. Your children were bastards. You were a ghost while still breathing. Many of these men fled to Iceland. They lived in caves. They became the trolls of folklore. Think about the psychological toll of that. You have a gift. You can see things others can't. You can heal the sick. You can calm the storms. But because you were born with a beard, using that gift makes you a monster in the eyes of your community. It's a tragic waste of potential. But here is the twist that really messes with your head. We have stories of the gods cross-dressing. We have Thor dressing up as a bride to get his hammer back. We have Odin dressing as a woman to get close to a princess. And we have the priests of the goddess Freyja. In Uppsala, the great temple, there were priests who wore bells and effeminate clothing. So clearly, there were pockets of society where this gender-bending magic was tolerated. Why? It comes down to the concept of the sacred king. Some historians believe that in very, very old Germanic traditions, the king was married to the goddess of the land. To communicate with her, he had to take on a female role symbolically. So Ragnvald Rettilbein, the guy who got burned, maybe he wasn't a pervert. Maybe he was a traditionalist. Maybe he was trying to practice an ancient form of kingship that his father, Harald Fairhair, was trying to stamp out. Harald wanted to be a modern, European-style king. He wanted centralized power. He didn't want mystical, gender-fluid shamans running around. He wanted knights and taxes. The burning of Ragnvald wasn't just a punishment, it was a political purge. It was the new, macho Viking order destroying the old mystical shaman order. And they won. The image we have of Vikings today, the bearded, axe-wielding, magic-hating warrior, is the result of that propaganda victory. But the magic didn't die, it just went underground. In the Icelandic sagas, written hundreds of years after the Viking Age, we still see men using magic. But they are always the villains. They are always the ugly, sweaty, gross guys who live in the dark. Take the story of Kotkul. He's a sorcerer from the Hebrides who moves to Iceland. He and his family are basically a magic mafia. They use Seidr to kill people who annoy them. At one point, they create a magical storm to flip a ship and drown a man named Thord. When the locals finally catch Kotkul, they don't challenge him to a duel. They stone him to death. They bury him under a pile of rocks so heavy he can't come back as a draugr, a zombie. That fear of the undead is linked to magic too. A Seidman was believed to be so powerful that even death couldn't stop him. His soul was already loose, remember? So killing his body was just step one. You had to chop off the head, burn the body, and scatter the ashes to sea to be sure. So, we've covered the horror, the burning, and the shame. But I want to ask a question that flips this whole thing on its head. Did the women mind? We always talk about this from the men's perspective, but Seidr was the domain of women. The vulva, the prophetess, was the most respected woman in society. She travelled freely, she was paid in gold and rings. She had authority over jarls. If men started doing Seidr, they were encroaching on the one massive power base that women held exclusively. Maybe the stigma of Ergi wasn't just about men being insecure. Maybe the women helped enforce it to protect their trade union. Oh, you want to spin the distaff, Bjorn? That's cute. But aren't you worried your beard will fall off? Better leave the magic to us, honey. You go chop some wood. It's a theory, but it makes sense. In a world where women had limited political power, having a monopoly on the supernatural was a huge lever. They wouldn't want men taking that away too. As we reach the end of our investigation, we have to look at how this all ended. When Christianity arrived in the north, the game changed again. The Christians hated Seidr even more than the Vikings did. To the Christians, it wasn't just unmanly, it was demonic. Men practicing magic went from being social outcasts to heretics. The laws became even stricter. But interestingly, the gender bias flipped. In the Viking Age, men were punished more harshly for magic because it shamed them. In the Christian Age, women were punished more harshly because they were seen as witches. The Viking hatred of the Seidman was replaced by the European hatred of the witch. But the legacy of the Seidman remains. It's in the word warlock. You know that word? Warlock. We use it in D&D and fantasy movies to mean a cool male wizard. But the word comes from Old English and Old Norse roots. Wire loga. It means oath-breaker. It means deceiver. A warlock wasn't a cool guy with a fireball. He was a traitor. He was a man who had broken his oath to society, to his gender, and to the natural order. So, the next time you see a movie with a Viking shaman, or you play a game where your character casts spells, remember the smoke rising from Ragnvald's hall. Remember that for the Vikings, the greatest power came with the greatest price. You could touch the spirit world, you could see the future, you could twist fate itself. But the cost was your honor. The cost was your identity. And in a world of ice and steel, losing your identity was a fate colder than death. I want to leave you with this thought. We like to think we are so different from the Vikings. We think we've moved past these rigid boxes of what a real man or a real woman is. But look at how we treat people who break norms today. Look at how we react when someone steps out of the role society assigned them. The Vikings burned their sons for being different. We might not use fire anymore, but the word Ergi, the weaponized shame, Is it really gone? Or have we just changed the syllables? What do you think? If you lived in the Viking Age, would you have chosen the power of Seidr, knowing it would make you an outcast? Or would you have stayed in the shield wall, safe but blind for the future? Let me know in the comments below. I read all of them, especially the ones that aren't cursed. Until next time, skål.